I was only trying to pay a parking ticket and answer a crucial work call, but thanks to a seemingly kindly judge, I ended up in a holding cell and stumbled into a multi-million-dollar corruption scandal. The air in the Providence Municipal Court was thick with the smell of old paper, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. I shifted on the hard wooden bench, my leg bouncing a frantic rhythm against the polished floor. A simple parking ticket. That's all it was. $100 fine for being 10 minutes over on a meter that I was pretty sure was broken anyway. In the grand scheme of my life, it was nothing, but on this particular Tuesday, it felt like the straw that was about to break the camel's back. My boss, David, was expecting a crucial project proposal on his desk by noon, and here I was, wasting my morning in a room full of people who looked just as miserable as I felt. At the front of the room, on the raised dais, sat Judge Frank Caprio. I'd seen clips of him online, the kindly old judge with the warm smile and the compassionate rulings. People loved him. They called him a hero, a saint in a black robe. Seeing him in person, he looked smaller, older, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He'd just let a tearful single mother off with a warning, and a wave of sympathetic murmurs rippled through the gallery. I rolled my eyes. That was all well and good for her, but I just wanted to pay my fine and get out. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A vibration of pure, unadulterated panic. I glanced at the screen. David Sterling. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The call about the proposal. I knew the rules. No phones, no talking, no disruptions. The signs were plastered everywhere. But this wasn't just a friend calling to chat. This was my career on the line. David didn't like to be kept waiting. Ignoring his call was professional suicide. I fumbled for the phone, my fingers clumsy with anxiety. I slid the green icon to the right and pressed the phone to my ear, cupping my hand over my mouth and turning my body towards the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. "David, hi," I whispered, my voice barely a squeak. "I'm so sorry. I'm in a bit of a situation right now." "Sarah, where are you? The Henderson team is on a conference line waiting for our numbers. I need the final projections. Now." His voice was clipped, impatient. The project was worth millions, and I was the lead analyst. The numbers he needed were in a draft email on my phone. I know, I hissed, frantically trying to navigate to my email app with one hand. "Just give me 30 seconds, I'm sending them right now." A large shadow fell over me. I looked up into the unimpressed face of a bailiff, a man whose neck was thicker than my thigh. He pointed a stern finger at my phone and then made a slicing motion across his throat. He didn't say a word, but his message was crystal clear. I gave him a tight, pleading smile and a frantic little wave, as if to say, "Just 1 second, I promise." He did not smile back. He just stood there, a granite statue of disapproval. "Sarah Jensen." The clerk's voice cut through the air. My head snapped up. It was my turn. Of all the rotten luck. The bailiff's eyes narrowed. David was still talking in my ear about profit margins. My mind was a whirlwind of panic. What was I supposed to do? Tell the head of my division to hold on while I dealt with a parking ticket? Or disrespect a courtroom and a famous judge? In that split second, my career won. I stood up, phone still pressed to my ear, and walked towards the bench. I could feel every eye in the room on me. The bailiff took a step towards me, but Judge Caprio raised a single, placid hand, stopping him. The judge watched me approach, his expression unreadable. "I'm sending it now, David," I whispered into the phone, avoiding the judge's gaze. "Check your inbox. It should be there." "Ache. Miss Jensen." Judge Caprio's voice was calm, but it held an edge of steel that I hadn't heard in the YouTube clips. "Are you on the phone?" I held up one finger to him, a gesture of, "Hold on a moment," a move I regretted the second I did it. "Your Honor, I am so sorry. This is an incredibly important work call. It will just be 1 more second." The courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his hands clasped on the bench. His kindly grandfather persona had completely vanished. "Miss," he said, his voice dropping low and serious, "in this room, right now, the only thing that is important is the business of this court. You will hang up that phone immediately." My blood ran cold. But David was still talking, confirming he'd received the email but had a question. The gears in my brain were grinding. I was so close. Just a few more seconds and this multi-million-dollar crisis would be averted. Surely the judge would understand. "He just has one question, Your Honor. I swear I'll be right off," I pleaded, turning my back to him slightly to shield the phone, a subconscious act of defiance. Judge Caprio sighed. It wasn't an angry sigh. It was a sound of deep, profound disappointment, which was somehow infinitely worse. He looked over my head to the bailiff who had been watching me. "Sergeant, I have given this young lady a direct order, which she has chosen to ignore. Please escort her to the holding cell." The words didn't even register at first. Holding cell? For what? A phone call? It had to be a scare tactic. He wasn't serious. But then the bailiff was beside me, his hand gently but firmly gripping my arm. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the silent room. This wasn't a scare tactic. This was real. "Wait," I stammered, the phone slipping from my suddenly numb fingers and clattering to the floor. "You can't be serious. Over a phone call?" Judge Caprio looked at me, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a weary resolve. "Ma'am, it was never about the phone call. It was about respect. You showed none for this institution. Perhaps a few hours in a cell will give you some time to reflect on that." He then turned to the bailiff. "And when you bring her back, make sure she understands what happens next if she still doesn't get the message." The world seemed to shrink to the tight circle of steel around my wrists. The bailiff's grip on my bicep was a firm, unyielding reality that cut through my disbelief. I was being led away like a common criminal. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom, a chorus of shocked whispers and disapproving clicks of the tongue. I didn't dare look at their faces. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that started at my collar and crept up my neck. My expensive work blazer felt like a costume, my whole professional identity a flimsy facade that had just been ripped away. My phone lay abandoned on the floor, its screen dark. David was probably still on the line, listening to the echoing silence of the courtroom, wondering what on earth had just happened. The walk was short, but it felt like miles. Down a short hallway, through a heavy metal door that buzzed open, and into a small, windowless room. The walls were cinderblock painted a depressing shade of beige. A simple metal bench was bolted to one wall. The air was cool and smelled faintly of bleach and regret. The bailiff uncuffed me with a practiced efficiency that spoke of countless others who had made this same walk of shame. "Wait, please," I said, my voice trembling. "This is a mistake. I need to call my boss. My job. The time for that is over," he said, his voice flat, not unkind, but utterly devoid of sympathy. "The judge told you what to do. You didn't listen. Now you sit and you think about why." The heavy door clanged shut, the sound echoing in the small space. A loud, definitive thud of a lock sliding into place sealed my fate. I was alone. For the first few minutes I just stood there, stunned into silence. This wasn't happening. It was a nightmare. $100 parking ticket had somehow escalated into me being locked in a holding cell. I paced the tiny room, my heels clicking an agitated rhythm on the concrete floor. Anger, hot and potent, began to boil in my stomach. How dare he? How dare that folksy TV judge with his compassionate act throw me in a cell? Didn't he understand pressure, deadlines, the real world? My world was important. My job was important. But as the minutes stretched into what felt like an hour, the anger began to curdle into a cold, sickening dread. The judge's words looped in my head. It was never about the phone call. It was about respect. I sank onto the cold metal bench, wrapping my arms around myself. I replayed the scene, walking up to the bench with the phone to my ear, whispering to my boss while the judge waited. And then I held up my finger to him. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it hit me like a physical blow. I had treated a courtroom like it was my personal office, the judge like an inconvenient interruption. I had been so wrapped up in my own self-importance, in the crisis of my project, that I'd shown blatant contempt for everyone and everything around me. The single mother with her tearful plea, the old man with his stack of citations, the judge himself, they were all just obstacles in my way. The hot shame returned, deeper this time, burning away the last of my indignation. The lock thudded again, making me jump. The door swung open, and the same bailiff stood there. "The judge will see you now." I followed him back into the courtroom in a haze. The public benches were empty now. The morning's business was clearly over. It was just me, the bailiff, the clerk, and Judge Caprio, who was sitting at his bench, reviewing a file. He didn't look up as I approached. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I stood before him, humbled and terrified, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. Finally, he closed the file and looked at me. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was something more serious, more probing. My phone was on the bench next to him. "Miss Jensen," he began, his voice quiet, but carrying the full weight of his authority. "While you were reflecting, your phone rang several more times. From a Mr. David Sterling. Given the circumstances and your insistence that it was an emergency, I had the clerk answer it." My blood turned to ice. He had my phone? They answered my phone? Judge Caprio leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Mr. Sterling was quite agitated. He was very concerned about some final projections and a Henderson deal. He was also quite adamant that I understand the pressure you were under. The judge paused, letting the words hang in the air. He was so adamant, in fact, that he emailed me a copy of the proposal you were working on, to emphasize its importance to the city's economy. And Sarah, I have to say, I found it very, very interesting. The silence in the courtroom pressed in on me, heavy and absolute. My mind raced, trying to process his words. David had emailed the judge my proposal? Why would he do that? To prove how important I was? To get me out of trouble? It felt like a desperate, reckless move, and a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. What could possibly be in that proposal that would make a municipal court judge find it very, very interesting? It was a standard corporate development plan. Projections, market analysis, profit margins. Dry as dust. "Your Honor, I don't understand," I stammered, my voice a weak whisper. "It's just a business proposal. My boss was just trying to explain the situation." Judge Caprio picked up a pair of reading glasses from his bench and perched them on his nose. He tapped a finger on a sheaf of papers next to him, a printout of David's email. "He certainly did explain the situation, Miss Jensen, more than he knows." He peered at me over the top of his glasses. "This Henderson deal. It involves the proposed redevelopment of the waterfront district, correct? Specifically, the old cannery road down on Allen's Avenue." I nodded dumbly, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, that's right. My firm is handling the investment analysis for the developers. It was a huge project, one of the biggest in the city's recent history. It was also highly controversial. The plan was to tear down a strip of historic, if dilapidated cannery buildings, to make way for luxury condos and a high-end shopping center. Community groups were up in arms about it, arguing it would destroy a piece of the city's heritage and displace low-income residents. "I'm familiar with it," the judge said, his voice level. "It's been a contentious issue at City Hall for months. The final zoning vote is next week." He looked down at the papers. "According to this proposal, your company is projecting a 35% return on investment for Henderson Corp., contingent on the City Council approving a very specific set of zoning variances and tax abatements. Variances, I might add, that the public has been assured are still under negotiation." My heart started to pound in a slow, heavy rhythm. Where was he going with this? This was all public record, more or less. The details were confidential, but the broad strokes were known. "But here's the part I find particularly interesting," he continued, his eyes scanning the page. "On page 42, Appendix B, there's a line item in your risk assessment analysis. It refers to a political facilitation fee of $250,000, paid out to a consulting firm named Ocean State Strategies, LLC. He took off his glasses and looked directly at me. His kind, grandfatherly face was gone, replaced by the shrewd, incisive expression of a man who had seen every lie and half-truth imaginable. "I'm a lifelong resident of Providence, Miss Jensen. I know most of the lobbyists and consultants in this town, and I've never heard of Ocean State Strategies, LLC. So I had my clerk do a little digging while you were enjoying the city's hospitality. He paused, letting the silence stretch again. I felt lightheaded. My hands were slick with sweat. I wanted to run, to disappear, but I was rooted to the spot, pinned by his unwavering gaze. "It turns out," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial quiet, "that Ocean State Strategies LLC was incorporated just 6 months ago. Its sole officer and director is a woman named Eleanor Vance." He let the name hang in the air. I stared at him blankly. The name meant nothing to me. "You don't recognize the name?" the judge asked, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Perhaps you'd recognize her husband, City Councilman Martin Vance. He's the swing vote on the zoning committee, the very committee that will decide the fate of your multi-million-dollar Henderson deal next Tuesday." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It couldn't be. A political facilitation fee, a shell corporation, the councilman's wife. It was a bribe. A blatant, clumsy, $250,000 bribe, and I had just hand-delivered the proof to a municipal court judge. All because I couldn't be bothered to hang up my phone for a parking ticket. The irony was so staggering, so cosmically awful, that a hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, but I choked it down. "Your Honor, I had no idea," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I'm just an analyst. I run the numbers. I didn't know what that meant." It was the truth. I had seen the line item, of course, but I'd assumed it was standard lobbying costs, legal fees. I never dug deeper. I was just focused on making the projections look good, on hitting my targets, on getting the deal done. "Ignorance can be a powerful shield, Miss Jensen," Judge Caprio said softly. "But it doesn't make you innocent. You're a smart woman. You work for a powerful company. You knew this project was controversial. You had to have suspected that a $250,000 fee to a company with a deliberately obscure name was more than just business as usual." He stood up, the black robes making him seem larger, more imposing. "You came into my courtroom this morning concerned about $100 fine and a deadline. You showed contempt for the law, for this court, and for everyone in it, because you believed your world was more important than ours." He leaned on the bench, his voice resonating through the empty room. "Well, your world and my world just collided, Miss Jensen, and now you have a choice to make, a choice far more significant than answering a phone call." He stared at me, his gaze intense, and for the first time I felt a sliver of genuine fear. This wasn't about my career anymore. This was about my freedom. You can walk out that door, try to forget this ever happened, and wait for the Attorney General's office to come knocking. I assure you they will. Or, he paused, his eyes narrowing, you can help us understand exactly how deep this rot goes. My mind reeled. The Attorney General. Rot. He was offering me a deal, a lifeline in a storm of my own making. But what a choice. On one side, loyalty to my company, to David, to the career I had meticulously built since college. On the other, the terrifying prospect of becoming a witness, a whistleblower, against powerful people with deep pockets and presumably very good lawyers. For a split second, the instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to deny everything, to plead ignorance and run. But the image of Councilman Vance and his wife collecting $250,000 to sell out a piece of their city, a fact I now held in my hands, was sickening. The judge was right. I wasn't entirely innocent. I had willfully worn blinders, focusing only on the numbers and not on the story they told. What would I have to do?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "For now," Judge Caprio said, sitting back down, "you just have to tell the truth. Everything you know about this deal, about David Sterling's instructions, about any other facilitation fees you might have seen in your time as an analyst." He gestured to his clerk, who discreetly activated a small recording device on her desk. "Your testimony here, right now, will be given under oath. If you are truthful, I will make a call to the Attorney General's office myself. I will explain the circumstances. I will tell them you chose to cooperate. It won't make your problems disappear, Miss Jensen, but it will put you on the right side of them." He looked at my abandoned phone on his bench, then back at me. "Your old life, the one where you were just an analyst worried about a deadline, that life is over. The only question is what your new life will look like. And so I talked. For the next hour, in the echoing silence of that empty courtroom, I told them everything. I walked them through the Henderson proposal, pointing out the subtle ways the numbers had been massaged to minimize environmental impacts and inflate job creation figures. I recalled conversations with David where he'd spoken in vague euphemisms about greasing the wheels and making the city partners happy. I accessed my work email on my phone and showed them other projects with similarly suspicious line items paid to other vaguely named consulting firms. It was a pattern. A system of quiet corruption hiding in plain sight on corporate spreadsheets. With every word, I felt the weight of my career, the life I had known, crumbling to dust. But I also felt something else, something I hadn't felt all day, a flicker of clarity, of purpose. When I was finished, the room was silent. Judge Caprio looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Miss Jensen. You've done the right thing." He turned to the clerk. "Please have the Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit send a team down, and please type up a dismissal for Miss Jensen's citation." He looked back at me. "The parking ticket," he said, a faint glimmer of his kindly TV persona returning. "We'll call it a wash." The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, investigators, and depositions. My face was splashed across the news. I was fired, of course, blacklisted from the financial industry. David Sterling and Councilman Vance were indicted, along with 2 other city officials. The Henderson deal collapsed spectacularly, and the Cannery Row was eventually designated a historic landmark. I lost my high-rise apartment, my fancy car, and most of the people I had considered friends. But I survived. The U.S. Attorney's Office granted me immunity in exchange for my testimony. I had to start over completely. I ended up taking a job with a small non-profit that advocated for municipal transparency, using my insider knowledge of spreadsheets and corporate doublespeak to expose the very kind of deals I used to help build. The pay was a fraction of what I used to make, but for the first time in years, I went home at the end of the day feeling like I had actually accomplished something worthwhile. About a year later, I was back at the Providence Municipal Court, this time helping a woman from my non-profit fight a series of unjust fines levied against her community garden. As we waited, I saw Judge Caprio take the bench. He looked exactly the same, maybe a little more tired. He worked through his cases with the same blend of patience, humor, and quiet authority. When he called our case, he looked up and our eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition, but nothing more. He listened patiently to our argument, reviewed the evidence, and dismissed all the fines. As we were leaving, the bailiff, the same one who had put me in handcuffs, stopped me at the door. "Judge wanted you to have this," he said, handing me a small folded note. I opened it after I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. It was written on the back of a court docket sheet in neat, elegant script. It said, "Miss Jensen, I see you finally learned to respect the right things. Well done." I folded the note and put it in my pocket. My life was smaller now, quieter, but it was mine. I had paid a heavy price for my arrogance that day, but in a way, Judge Caprio and that holding cell had done more than just teach me a lesson about respect. They had given me my life back, and for that, I would be forever grateful.